Okay, welcome to the ULF, everyone who is listening. This is Chairman Jack. I am accompanied by,
And this is Stick Rick.
as you guys can probably tell by the title of the video, this is another in part of the On series, like On Brazil and On the Koreas. Today, as you can read, we're talking about On South Africa. So, what we're going to talk about is the conditions that led to what we're going to describe here, democratic bourgeois revolution in 1994, or national democratic revolution, as probably is a better term, that happened in 1994. What led to that, and the impact and what's going on in South Africa today. So, um, to start, and Stick Rick, feel free to join in at any time. Basically, the conditions that led to the National Democratic Revolution, or colloquially the end of apartheid in 1994, was centuries of settler colonialism that existed like anywhere else in Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, etc. But rather than the British being the first people there, they were Dutch, and then the British eventually showed up. And the different yet similar thing to the settler colonialist countries was that the imperialism existed through this colonialist group. Like, they were imperializing the native people, even though they were living amongst them. They were still acting as an outside imperial force. Like, they didn't view themselves as South Africans or Africans. They viewed themselves as Europeans and white people. And you can see this in the signs. They'll probably put up photos of, the white only or the European only benches and things like that. So you had these generations and generations of apartheid and settler colonialism that entrenched in everyday society. And rather than it being some liberal type of settler colonialism like what you see in the United States, where we give some false hope to our oppressed peoples, it was stringent in their laws. Like, if there was a white person walking on the side of the road, or on the sidewalk, and you were black, you had to get out of their way. You had to go all the way over into the grass, or almost into the road, or else you could be fined or arrested. And even if you were a mixed child, you were illegal. You were born illegal if you were mixed. If you were, or how the South Africans use the term, colored. If you were a half white or a half black person, you were born a crime. Your mere existence is a crime. So you had these intense laws that were used to subjugate the population. Yes, they did give them some false hope at some time with their quote unquote I believe they're called Baluchistans, where they were basically these false autonomy zones, basically saying, oh yeah, you guys can rule your own like tribal settlements, quote unquote. And we'll even give you your own house in parliament that only black people can be a part of, but it's not going to have any real authority. And hell, even for the Indians and the Asians, and anyone else who isn't black or white, we'll give you your own house in parliament, so you don't make a fuss either. And so you had this sort of liberal appeasement, while at the same time giving this mass oppression so you wouldn't want to question it. And those who did, they gave them false or harsh jail settlement or harsh jail sentences, like what happened to Nelson Mandela. See his 30-year sentence because he simply riled up the people and said, "No, we need to fight against apartheid and we need to fight against white rule and liberate the majority black population." And these were basically the conditions that led up to 1994. It was this harsh treatment and also this fierce anti-communist rhetoric that came from the government, because that's how the government got so much support from Ronald Reagan and other U.S. leaders, was their fierce anti-communism, because they associated blacks with communism, which is partially true because the main people who were pushing for the end of apartheid were communists. See Nelson Mandela, see the ANC, and see who they worked with. Well, the South African Communist Party. So all these things mixing together is what led to that national democratic revolution that ended apartheid in 1994. Sekrick, do you have anything like to add?
To be honest, you keep cutting out, and I'm like, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Big oof all around. Well, I
Yep.
apologize for the technical difficulties. Well, I'll have to give you the question then. Well, before we deal with the question of the National Democratic Revolution, we'll deal with another big fact that you see post this revolution is the fact that they like to liberal wash Nelson Mandela and the
Oh yeah,
legacy of
absolutely.
those who went against apartheid. Yeah. Like, Rick, how do you learn about Nelson Mandela in school? What are you taught if you are taught about him?
You're barely taught anything about him. You're taught that he was a civil rights leader. That's pretty much it. And the impression that you get as a kid, mostly from U.S. society, is that he was a moderate. You're basically taught that he was the same image they feed to you that they feed MLK. Where they they totally leave out the fact that he was branded as a terrorist by the government.
Yeah.
They leave out the fact that he was a communist. They leave out the fact that it's just
No, I fully agree with that.
yeah.
And then people, especially in the U.S., don't like to talk about why Nelson Mandela went to jail. It was because the CIA tipping off the apartheid government, saying he was pretending to be a taxi driver in order to get around the country. So that's how he got arrested and given that mass sentence. That you hear the movie Evictus about how Nelson Mandela overcame his prison sentence, but why did he get that prison sentence in the first place? Well, because the United States putting him in jail.
I think one of the reasons this liberal washing is so dangerous is because it gives people the impression that these radical, the radical methods of obtaining freedom from the injustices of white supremacy and capitalism, and that those are unprecedented and that those are immoral. That's not anything that hero would do. That's not anything that the people we value and look up to of the past would do. I think people on the right like a strange way of looking at it, where they see it as some covert way of pushing radical messages by liberal washing and whitewashing these, when in reality it's just an attempt to take them back from the institutions that tried to jail them.
No, I fully agree with that. And I also think a key thing in modern liberal society is this radical pacifist view when it comes to domestic policy. And you see this everywhere. Is, oh, you can't be violent or else you're a thug. You can't be violent or else you're a terrorist. You can't be violent or this, that, and the other. And you're some freedom-hating, whatever slur you want to toss onto the end of that sentence.
You're the real Nazi.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, I think the foundation of modern liberal society comes through incredible, terrifying violence. How we live with the rights that we have now came through unmitigating and horrific violence. How did um how did we get modern working rights? Well, the Pinkertons shot people dead that were protesting for rights. The Battle of Blair Mountain, where mining workers got so sick of having awful conditions that they grabbed their guns and started shooting at U.S. soldiers. How did modern secularism come across Europe? Well, the guillotines got whipped out during the French Revolution, and they hacked off anyone's head who wanted to support the Catholic Church and wanted to support monarchies. How did monarchies start to fade away and republics start to be a thing? Well, one, you had Napoleon when he also, well, before Napoleon with the French Revolution, once again lopping off people's heads. And then you had World War I, which, if your monarch wasn't being shot in the head, he was told if he ever came back to their country, he would be shot in the head. See the Kaiser, see half of the European monarchs, like in the Ottomans and Italy after World War II, etc., that said we'd hang you up by your feet and kill you if you wanted to continue being a monarch. Incredible, terrifying violence is how our modern society is established. But the moment you call that into, you say, this is how our society came about, they say, no, 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 that's bad. No, 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 we can't do that. And they'll even try to liberal wash it and try to be like, oh, the French Revolution was bad, but other ways to liberalize wasn't bad. See Nelson Mandela, where he peacefully asked for freedom and he got it, when that wasn't the case. Nelson Mandela was giving people guns. And
he just got freedom by asking for it.
Yeah, exactly. No, how did he get arrested? What was he doing? Well, he was called a terrorist because, to be frank, in Western liberal words, he could be described as a terrorist. He was arming people to overthrow the government. The one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So
absolutely,
yeah. So to the African people, he's a freedom fighter. He's fighting for their freedom. But the Western governments, yeah, you can call him a terrorist because what was he doing? He was giving people fucking guns to go shoot the leader of the. He was getting guns to shoot the Boers in the fucking head for terrifying them and putting them in mass terror constantly. And
the leaders of every real revolution in human history would be branded as terrorists in modern America. Like, even going back to the bourgeois American Revolution, those people will be branded as terrorists today.
Yeah, exactly. Because what did George Washington do? What did Thomas Jefferson do? Even if you don't want to call it a revolution, you want to call it a rebellion, you want to call it whatever, what did they do? They got guns, they spread it out amongst the people, or at least some people, and they shot the British in the fucking face. That is incredible, terrifying violence. And it even gets into the arguments that you'll see with like anti-capitalists, and I get this is off tangent from South Africa. We'll get back to that soon. But people talk about the terror that would come with revolution. You see this especially among social democrats. They say, oh, the terror is going to come, and we don't want people to die left and right. More people live in systematic suffering every day across the Western world and across any imperialized country than what terror any revolution can bring. The terror that could have been brought if Nelson Mandela didn't peacefully, or at least the Boers didn't just give up power. And yes, you did see reactionaries and terrorist cells come out left and right. But if under mass sanctions and BDS and the threat of terror didn't make the Boers quit with their violence, you would have, or if they didn't have that happen, you would have saw mass terror by a revolution. But that revolution, even with whatever actions it would bring, even if they did just start killing Boers, that terror would be far less than what happened to the South African people for 300 years by the oppression of apartheid and systematic genocide and colonialism. The terror that they brought is insurmountable comparable to what any revolution could bring. So you hear this argument against the terror, but whatever terror a revolution can bring is nothing compared to the mass starvations, the mass genocides that these Western and settler colonialist nations are founded upon.
Absolutely. It's just a completely privileged liberal narrative that's been like force-fed into the working class that, you know, revolution isn't worth it. Violence isn't worth it because it'll kill more people than it saves. It's just a total... It's pretty much just it's as simple as a trolley problem.
Mm-hmm. It's false consciousness.
People are... Yeah, it's as simple as a trolley problem. We're like... If people are too scared to take action from over one person to save five.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, as Marx talks about with the false consciousness, they just want to feed you like, oh, you need to go after a minority, or oh, you need to go after this or that, or oh, the revolution is impossible because look at all the nice things you have. It gives you this false consciousness about what it means to be working class and what it means to be proletarian, rather than looking at the actual issues of what goes on in South Africa and what goes on across the proletarians across the world and all the systematic terror that it comes with. So, to get back to South Africa, because I believe we're around reaching the 20-minute mark, and these are supposed to be like 30-minute videos, so my apologies to everyone who's now off in the bush getting confused by our tangent we just went on. But get back to South Africa. A big thing that nobody really wants to talk about, and everyone thinks about this, it's not really an element, But if you look at the major forces pushing to the end of apartheid, it was the ANC, who at that time were still socialists and were in conjunction with the South African Communist Party, which they still are, and were all supporters of a socialist revolution. But if you look at the context of what was happening with the end of apartheid, you also, saw the fall of the Soviet Union. So what was actually believed was that if the Soviet Union would have stayed together, a socialist revolution would have been on the way, because one, they could have gotten funding from the Soviet Union, and two, they would have had the defense of the Warsaw Pact from any possible NATO retaliation. But why they didn't go down this revolutionary route and stayed in this national bourgeois type governmental system or social democratic type system was because they couldn't have a socialist revolution. Because as you saw with Iraq and the Gulf War, well, everyone, Russia, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, all the Eastern Bloc said, oh, let's be happy friends with the West now by bombing some random Middle Eastern country. Haha, have fun, Saddam. So Nelson Mandela knew this, so he didn't want to go down this revolutionary socialist route because he knew that if he did, he'd be invaded. And then two, he wouldn't have gotten enough material support, because the only person left who could have supported him was Cuba. And Cuba also at that same time lost their Moscow money, so they didn't have the proper time to give money towards Nelson Mandela because they had to fully readjust their economy to brace around the fall of the Soviet Union. So you see a lot of discounting of South Africa as some random social democratic state, when in actuality they are a revolutionary one. They're just in a national bourgeois or national democratic type state because they haven't been able to move towards socialism, because the worldwide current has been against them. And even now you're starting to see left forces challenge that in the form of the EFF and the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party, or some variation of that, just came into existence. Because these new left currents, whether they be good or not, are starting to challenge this establishment of the ANC, because they're starting to become complacent in that social democratic state, and they're no longer seeing a push for revolution after they considered it to be impossible. But yeah, so I think a big takeaway about South Africa, and honestly, we haven't even talked about the land problem yet, which we probably should get to.
Yeah.
If you want to start that, but so honestly, yeah, I think that's probably the best route to finish this off. So, as even though this is old news, we'll finish up on that route. Sorry if this is all over the place. But we'll finish up on that route of expropriation without compensation. So that was in the big talks over the past year, especially with all these settler colonialist governments talking about white genocide and how these white Afrikaners are being oppressed, because they're being thrown off their land. And Trump, sorry, continue.
When in reality, it's inherited or they bought, but who did they inherit it from or buy it from? Bought from somebody else, who got from somebody else, who stole it.
Exactly.
South African people. There is no justification for white farmers owning that land. Land is the key to freedom. While black South Africans live in townships, which is one of the many reasons why they're still in deep shit today, because they have absolutely no freedom over their own land ownership.
Yeah, that's entirely true, and especially who they're taking land from. They're not taking land from some guy who's growing crops left and right trying to feed people. No, they're taking land from people who aren't using their land. Because if you look at it, 80% of the land owned in South Africa is owned by 12 or 14% of the population who are white Afrikaners. No way does that make logical sense. And as I just talked about why they didn't go down the revolutionary route, a side effect of that is that economic apartheid still exists to this day, with whites owning all the land and owning all the wealth, while blacks are still systematically disadvantaged, or have a systematic disadvantage by owning far less land.
I think all the people who are claiming or sort of being apologetic towards these white genocide theories about, the South African government expropriating land and giving it to black farmers. I think people need to recognize at what point in history South Africa is at. Because, okay, 2019 right now, right?
Mhm.
1994. Now, just comparing that to America, a less severe institutionalized racism. You would basically be at the point of 1989. Isn't an exact comparison for what is, but you know what I mean. Where they are not at the point of, well, not to say like, because the U.S. is completely unequal among races, but to a lesser extent than we are.
Mhm.
Black people in South Africa are so far down the economic food chain because of their treatment and because of the stifling of revolution in the 90s. And it's ridiculous to say that this expropriation of land that was stolen from them generations ago is some sort of to just against white people.
Mhm. Yeah, I also think that when people try to defend apartheid or these white settlers, it's just a subtle, oh, I'm white and I need to side with white people against any attack upon their privilege.
Oh,
Because even like you'll see these like false narratives about how much nicer things were under apartheid, but for whom? 10% of the population, while 90% lived in slums and got shot in the street and were being brutally oppressed. Who was it nicer for when they tell these narratives? Oh, apartheid South Africa was so nice, but for whom? For what? The racists, the bigots, the arms dealers, whom? So I think the big thing that people need to look themselves in the face for when they don't want to support land expropriation is why. Why don't you support this? Because you're white? Because you believe in some random narrative about how evil blacks in South Africa are, how they don't know how to run their own government? It's basically these same colloquial lies that you hear in America when black people get into government anywhere. Oh, Detroit's run amok, so it's black people's fault. It's not the rich who tried to undermine the city. Oh, South Africa is dealing with corruption and homelessness and all this stuff. Oh, so it's the fault of black rule, not whites systematically disadvantage or giving a disadvantage to people who could give economic growth by their mere existence in a market. No, 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 no. It's black people's fault. It's not the rich. It's none of this fault. It turns into the right's own version of identity politics.
what's equally as obnoxious is people who say they don't have a problem with the land expropriation, but they need to be compensated.
Fuck that.
For having land they weren't using that they stole. Were
Yeah,
the South Africans who had their land stolen from them compensated?
yeah, fuck that. Like, you're just like it's just stupid to try to act as if people who aren't using their land and are just hoarding land deserve compensation when it gets, you know, given to people for it.
Yeah, like first off, the commodification of land, these few elites owning almost all the land in South Africa, that's ethically wrong to begin with, but you're not going to get a liberal to agree with that immediately. From their point of view, nothing they did to earn that land. They came in, they were stronger, they stole it.
Yeah, exactly. And even the people within South
The
Africa.
white farmers have no high ground for having that, for serve that land.
Yeah, and even the people within South Africa who you see defending the farmers, you have two groups. I actually remember watching parliamentary debates in South Africa after the land expropriation thing became a thing, just because it's super interesting. But there's two basic factions that are against land expropriation. One is the Liberal Alliance, or the Democratic Alliance. But they're basically these former apartheid people that now try to liberalize themselves out to get mass support. So they have like a token black person here and there. They have a token black leader, even though the leader before that was white and their deputy leader is white, a majority black country. It'd be like if, I don't know, I don't even know the comparison of it. It's just weird. And so they'll be like, oh no, that's not the nice thing to do. They should be compensated. This is just the ANC trying to get favor and buying votes. And then you have the other faction of white nationalists within South Africa, Afrikaner nationalists, who then go, oh, we didn't conquer that land. The land, nobody lived there. It's the same lie they tell about Israel, people with no land for a land with no people. They're like, oh, we didn't take the land. Nobody lived there. Nobody wanted the land, so we just came and took it. And they'll try to deny the entire existence of apartheid and systematic genocide. And it's just fucking wild. I honestly just recommend it to anyone watching this video. Go watch some of the old debates from land expropriation without compensation in the South African parliament. Because it'll blow your mind with the people who you see supporting. Like, you'll see people who support it wearing red berets and EFF who are on the side of the ANC. You'll see the ANC just being like, oh yeah, we need to get it passed and all this stuff. And then you'll see the Liberal Alliance being like, oh no, that's bad. And then you'll see some random white dude get up and be like, you see he wants to say the N-word. Like, you physically see it. Like, he wants to say it, but he knows he can't. And it's just wild. So no, I think that's a big thing that nobody wants to, like, even the people within South Africa, who is against it? Well, you have token liberals who say it's bad because it's mean to whites and won't help the economy and it's just buying votes. And then you'll see white people be like, no, this is our land, I don't care, I'll steal it again, like, it wasn't even stolen, like, I hate everyone, I wish apartheid still existed.
It's just cowardice from the moderate liberals over there and over here too. They just go with whatever has been normalized, regardless of whether it's actually like rationally that different. Like they'll go on about compensating these white farmers, but how are you going to compensate them? Through taxation.
Yeah.
Like, is that any different? How is that any different from just giving the black South Africans their land that they're entitled to? I don't know.
No, exactly. I agree with that. And it's the same thing you see with liberals in America. Anytime reparations towards former slaves, or even anything that would remotely help the poor, oh no, that's politically not good sounding. It's not what we need to do at this current point. Like people like Nancy Pelosi and all those and Amy Schumer, or not Amy Klobuchar. My bad, I said Amy Schumer. But Amy Klobuchar and like the rest of these random liberals just being whatever aids white people and especially rich white people rather than actually looking at working class issues. So I just see this is another act of cowardice and liberal washing by even modern day liberals trying to change the narrative, and rather than looking at a working class narrative, just want to push it towards being, oh, this is an issue that needs to be resolved through complex steps in order to make sure that it never even happens.
It's just bizarre. And even if you look at outside the racial aspect and just like, you know, the aspect of it that's housing and shelter, you look at somebody like your opinions on Jeremy Corbyn. Like I remember a few years back, he expropriated like some unused building that from some overseas business that was not in use, and a whole lot of liberals got so pissed off at him for it. He was taking it to house people who didn't have homes. Mm-hmm. It's just insane that they would flip their shit over that when posed a plan to maybe, you know, like actually build new homes. They might actually support it. You know, not too many because economy.
The same thing just happened in San Francisco, where $60,000 were just raised by wealthy San Franciscans in order to make sure a homeless shelter wasn't going to be built in San Francisco. Like, anytime poor people are actually being aided, even through the most social democratic, most liberal means, through basic nationalizing of whatever industry, liberals will freak out because it's a challenge to the system in itself and a system that they support. Even if they want to act as if they exist outside of the system, they entirely are in line with the system. And honestly, if I can leave anyone listening to this with anything, I think the biggest issue that needs to be faced, especially with South Africa, and people, it's honestly the same things that we should feel about Venezuela to a degree, is even though Maduro is basically a social democrat, the people who oppose him, the people who oppose the ANC, are the wealthy and the white of these countries. So, I think what needs to be noticed with South Africa, with land expropriation without compensation, is everything that we've said throughout this video. Is the revolutionary history of the ANC, the revolutionary history of Black Power movements within South Africa. And what needs to absolutely be seen is support for the ANC, even though they're social democrats, even though they're this and that, because they are still pushing towards progress for black people within South Africa. And progress, that is the majority, that is 80% of the population, 85% of the population, whatever number. And that's who should be supported, is the working class of these countries. People say, what about the working class Afrikaners? Well, it's the same thing with what about working class white people within Venezuela or within America? Well, yeah, they exist. And yeah, they should be supported. But if they're going to choose their race over their class through some false consciousness, then no. Like, I don't care. I don't. They ought not to be supported over the majority who are oppressed and are of an ethnic minority, because then they're oppressed by the system within itself, how it acts doubly through their race and through their class. So it's the same thing in America. Like, I'm not going to side with a reactionary white guy simply because he's white and he may be working class, but I'm not going to side with him. If it means me siding with a working class black person, then yeah, I'm going to do that. It's the same thing with South Africa and Venezuela. The people, even though you can say whatever you want about the ANC, whatever you want to say about Maduro, they need to be supported through anti-imperialism and class solidarity and international solidarity with oppressed peoples all around the world, which is a key founding step of socialism. So, I don't know, that's just the big steps. These videos are designed to not be too long. So, if anyone wants to do any additional research, we'll probably leave links to various websites in the description. But, yeah, do you have any final words you want to say, Stick Rick?
I don't really have any last thoughts.
Alright, then this has been the ULF. I have been Chairman Jack.
Rick.
And I hope you guys have a great day.